today by Todd Skaar. Todd is a PI along with myself and Lori in the Ignite network, which is implementing genomics in practice. I'm sure you'll hear something about that from Todd. And he originally got trained in lactation science, if I'm getting the terminology correct, thinking that he was going to go into the dairy industry, and then got trained in nutrition at the University of Wisconsin, and then went to Georgetown. I guess he saw the light and also met David Flockart, who is an icon in the pharmacogenetics world, and it was at Georgetown where Todd got trained in studying drugs that are involved with cancer therapies and response and resistance, and followed David to Indiana University to start up an effort in personalized medicine there, which Todd has played a prominent role in pharmacogenetics. And unfortunately, even though Todd is a wonderful protege of David's, David died about a year and a half ago from glioblastoma, and while he was part of our Ignite network, and Todd took the reins and steadily so has brought the program at IU forward in a major way. So really looking forward to hearing about both the I guess the successes and challenges in implementing pharmacogenomics at IU. Todd?
Thank you. Thanks, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here. It's actually the first time I've been on campus. I've been in the neighborhood for soccer tournaments for my kids in the past 6 months or so, but actually we never, and I thought about coming over here, but I never actually made it over here. But I've been seeing quite a few familiar faces in the crowd that we've seen at many of the Ignite meetings and other ones. So it is really a pleasure to be here. Hopefully I can give you some interesting things that we've, some challenges and some things that have actually worked that we've run through in trying to implement pharmacogenomics at our center. And it's, I'll start out giving, that's not this one, isn't it? Okay. I'll start with just a brief background as sort of where pharmacogenetics originally sort of came, but only just a couple slides on it to get up to where really where we are. And I'll then describe what we call the Ingenious study, which is our Ignite-funded trial, prospective trial that we're doing. And then that has also led into some other implementation of pharmacogenomics into our IU Precision Genomics Oncology Clinic. And then I'll talk at the end, if we have time, I'll talk about some of our efforts that we're doing to actually discover the new variants that hopefully we will be eventually implementing down the road. And these are, this is funded through the NHGRI, through that study. This is actually really started out as part of an oncology clinic that really is now self-funding, but it's a somatic mutation and some germline variants. And this is stuff funded by two different R01s that I'm also a PI on. Personalized medicine or precision medicine is, caught on a lot lately, especially when Obama got up and, was next to the DNA and started talking about it. But really, we've known for how many years, back in 1931, there was observations like this, as every active drug is a poison when taken in large enough doses. And in some subjects, doses which are innocuous to the majority of people have toxic effects, whereas others show exceptional tolerance to the same drug. So it's, the whole, and this, different people have different definitions of precision medicine or personalized medicine or whatever you want to call it. In my opinion, it involves all kinds of things, not just genomics, but, looking really at a wide variety of things. And then moving forward into the 50s and 60s, some pioneering aspects showing things like prolonged effects to succinylcholine. Muscle relaxant was due to a patient's defect in cholinesterase activity, which was ultimately identified to be a variant in the gene that affects that. Isoniazid, an anti-malaria drug that causes peripheral neuropathy in some patients due to lack of one of the N-acetyltransferase drugs. So these these were observations that we now know is a gene-based or genetic variant. You know, back in the 50s and 60s, people had seen these sort of things. While jumping up to the current time, and by the way, if anybody has questions or anything, you know, points they want to discuss, feel free to interrupt me during the talk. Then, you know, now there's, you know, to jump way forward, the FDA has highlighted pharmacogenomic biomarker information in over 100 drugs in the actual FDA label, of which very few people actually read, I think, except for people that make slides like this, so we can actually put it on the slide. But that includes a variety of things from expression of drug targets to genetic variants affecting things like targets, drug disposition, and things like HLAs. Most of what the work is that we've been doing is focused on drug metabolism. That's mostly the hepatic drug metabolizing enzymes, but it's really a wide variety of different things. So there was all this information in the drug labels, but yet there really wasn't, and there was, you know, a lot of evidence had been shown that the genetic variants affected the drug response, but there really was very little implementation of these genetic variants into actual clinical practice. So back in, I think it was like 2010 or 11, around in there, like a few of us sort of got together that spun out of the Pharmacogenetics Research Network and started what was what's now called abbreviated CPIC, but the Clinical Pharmacogenetics Implementation Consortium. And the goal of this group was to actually write guidelines that are now published, and there's a bunch of these, I think, for at least 22 drugs now. Guidelines, clinical guidelines that are published to really give a physician direction of what to do if a patient comes into their office. You're going to give them a drug, and they already have the prescription, or they already have their genotype in their hand. Okay, so it's not should we genotype or not for a given drug, but if somebody comes in, what should you actually do with it? And that's there two different questions that, you know, are addressed in different ways. But this one is specifically that because there are people that were starting to do it, and physicians were starting to get this, and people are starting to do preemptive genotyping in panels rather than just one gene at a time. So you do a whole panel and you've got 20 genes on there, and then there are subsequent medications which are often prescribed. They needed the information for that. So that's what the goal was, and these are being now endorsed by a variety of different things. It's a variety of different organizations that are really key in some of the pharmacotherapies. This is an example of one of them that we published that I was a co-author on back in 2012. This is a specific one related to codeine therapy in the context of the CYP2D6 genotype. And then not only are they originally published, every 2 years there's an agreement that every 2 years we'll reevaluate the literature and make any updates if there's actual change in the literature. And just as an example of this case for people who may not be familiar with this, so codeine is metabolized to morphine by this hepatic enzyme, Cytochrome P450 2D6. Just makes one little modification that makes a huge difference because codeine itself actually has very little analgesic activity. That becomes important because that particular gene is one that we've studied a lot. We know in different populations, but in the U.S. and European populations, about 5 to 10% of the population has genetic variants in CYP2D6, so they have no functional activity because they have either completely lost the gene in some cases, or they have genetic variants that cause either truncations or really detrimental amino acid substitutions, so they have no functional CYP2D6. Then there's about, that's people that have no functional, there's 20 to 30% have some but reduced activity, and then there's 1 to 2% that have inherited, these are all germline variants, that have inherited multiple copies of it, up to, it's been reported up to 13 copies of CYP2D6, which actually hyper-metabolize these drugs. So if it's one of the drugs like codeine that's actually activated, you're at an increased risk of getting basically overdose, respiratory suppression, and in some cases death. There's a case reports of it and people who were, for example, let me put the slides in, but there was a New England Journal of Medicine report of a mother who was taking codeine after a baby was born because of episiotomy, and they turned out she was actually an ultra-rapid metabolizer. She was making so much morphine, which then got transferred into the milk, and because babies don't metabolize morphine very well, and the baby actually ended up dying of respiratory depression because the mother was an ultra-rapid metabolizer. It's a long story, but the way they actually figured it out was actually very interesting, because she had saved some of her milk and put it in the freezer, and they actually went and looked at that. Because, and this, one of the reasons this one becomes important is because oftentimes, whether it's an emergency room or even in a case like that, the first reaction was, did the mother actually intentionally overdose the baby for reasons because she wants the baby or whatever? So there was a legal investigation into that. So the poor mother, who had done nothing wrong, now had the police department come and investigate her for that. And it turned out there was a genetic explanation for it. In the same way, there's a lot of people who go to the emergency room, even if they know that they don't respond to codeine, they're afraid to tell the physician in the ER, because the first thing they're going to think is because they're using illicit drugs or anything. And here it's purely a genetic effect is why that actually happens. And this is a case, and this isn't our studies, from Julia Kirschner in Germany, but just to show, this is the PK after a single dose of codeine, and you see the different groups. So these are poor metabolizers, so they have no functional 2D6. These are normal metabolizers, and these are ultra-rapid metabolizers that have multiple copies. But the main point here is, if you look at codeine, there's not that much difference, but it's only a small amount of codeine that actually gets converted to morphine. If you look at the green line down here in the concentration of morphine after a single dose, those patients who are poor metabolizers make no morphine out of codeine, and consequently they get no real pain relief. And that's illustrated here, which is another slide that's not ours, but just to show in normal metabolizers, if you look at baseline resting ventilation rate, which is a measure of the morphine response or the codeine response, it goes down in normal metabolizers. You get an initial bump down, but only for a few minutes in the other people. So there was evidence like this building, but people were not actually implementing it. I mean, you could tell by its relatively simple test. 2D6 is more difficult than a lot of them, but a relatively simple test, you should be able to figure that out. But it wasn't actually being implemented, and I forgot. This slide is in those guidelines for all of these drugs. There's also a table in here that shows basically the predicted phenotype from those genotypes, whatever it is. This is basically the clinical application part of it, what the implications are for those particular genotypes that cause these phenotypes, and then a recommendation for what to do with if you're we're going to give somebody codeine, and then here's the classification of how strong that evidence is supporting that actual conclusion. So there was a bunch of this evidence. It wasn't actually being implemented very much. There was very few people. The insurance companies aren't reimbursing it. Really very few people were actually using it. So the question then, we started thinking, so what is it that needs to be happen in order for there to be implementation? Number one, there has to be clinical value in the practice setting. I think there's evidence for a lot of these things like codeine and a bunch of other drugs. But it also needs to be economically viable in such settings. It needs to, the genetic test should be widely implemented if it can be shown to be of high value. If it can be shown to be a high value medicine, so there's got to be a medical benefit to it. And the genetic test will only be widely implemented if the providers are properly incentivized. If it's so, there's got to be, and this can be, the healthcare system in general. If it's an added test, that just means somebody, or if it costs a lot more and there's really no actual cost savings, it's hard to convince a lot of healthcare systems to actually implement it. So there's got to be both financial and clinical value. So we, in the study which I'll talk about, which our IGNITE study, thought that an economic analysis alongside the clinical studies will actually generate some of this information that is needed for widespread adoption and support of the clinical testing. So that might sound like a simple thing to do, a cost-effectiveness trial or something. But as we got into it, we really realized you need, it's really an interdisciplinary approach. You need the geneticists and pharmacology people that have the ideas, but it needs to be integrated into the electronic medical records, and you need, the economists to help figure out how to get the costs out of the data, whether you can do things like use CPT coding and then use average costs, or whether you actually pull out total costs and how to actually do it. So it's really a interdisciplinary approach. We have at IU part of a couple different healthcare systems. This is our county hospital, Eskenazi, and at IU Health, which is our bigger statewide healthcare system. And we have the VA hospital, along with the School of Public Health, where we get economists, and the bioinformatics, where we get the informatics people from. So as we started thinking about this, so the question is, what economic questions should we be asking? Right? So there's a variety of different things, and that depends on who you ask. And if you ask the policymakers, you get one answer. If you ask the providers, you may get another answer. And if you ask the payers, you can actually get a third answer. So even once you decide that we're going to try and address the economics of this, it depends on who you ask. And really, in a rapidly evolving field like genomics, we got to try and anticipate what the future priorities will be. But even if we figured out what we wanted to ask, you also then got to figure out what actually can we ask, because a lot of economic analyses that are done, at least in the U.S., rely on administrative data from electronic medical records. That does not include costs of training people, I don't know what we do in academic institutions, training people to use it, the data collection, so you've got to, in order for the data to be right, it's got to be collected, and it's got to be the correct data, and then the information processing. If you're going to start incorporating whole genome sequence data, and every patient has a terabyte of data, where you can store it in a HIPAA-compliant system and all that. So a lot of these actual costs can't necessarily be included. And when you actually do pull data like this out, I think anybody who's dealt with any of this, realizes that a lot of these codes often reflect what's really needed to receive reimbursement, and therefore not necessarily the most accurate measure of the actual events that occurred. And consequently, it's not always easy to figure out what some of those are. In addition, if you use an administrative data, all of that may capture the physician or the provider, the medication data, the hospitalization. That doesn't oftentimes include things like the number of sick days because the medication wasn't working, or things like rehabilitation, because administrative data usually stops at the hospital, and if they go to a long-term care unit, which is like things like they have a stroke and they're have a long-term physical therapy after that, usually those are not actually captured in a lot of the administrative data. A lot of these things that I hadn't honestly thought about until we engaged our economists on this. And also, so there's a lot of modeling then that can be done. So you can take some data, CPT codes, and do a lot of modeling and things, but they usually do not account for gene-gene interactions. It's the only way you can do it is one gene and then look at a response to it. It's difficult to do the gene-gene interactions. They oftentimes don't account for other comorbidities. And the polypharmacy, of the people we've, enrolled, there's a huge number of different combinations of other polypharmacy that they're actually on. So if you're going to try and model this stuff, how do you account for those sort of variabilities also? Anyway, so there are a variety of limitations, but we were fortunate enough to get funded through the NHGRI IGNITE network, what we call our Ingenious trial, which stands for the Indiana Genomics Implementation and Opportunity for the Underserved. I took a few beers and a couple nights to come up with that. It was probably after we'd had a few because we thought we were pretty smart or something, I don't know. And so the idea with this trial was testing the effect of pharmacogenetics genotyping on the healthcare costs in an underserved population. And this we thought was potentially important. It was originally targeted with the Eskenazi Hospital, which is our county hospital that has a lot of people that are on Medicaid, some Medicare, and a lot of people that are uninsured there. And so, you know, as we were talking about, I was talking with somebody earlier, it's one thing if you think about some of the prospective randomized controlled trials where the patients agree to come back, you know, like with warfarin, come back twice a week, get their INRs tested, and these things that are very close phenotypic monitoring of these. It's a different story if you've got a family or a mother who's got a single mother who's got to decide whether they're going to spend the $3 to take the bus ride back to the hospital and get this test, whatever they told me to do, versus buy another box of cereal so the kids have food to eat the next morning. So, you know, it's a different potential population than what some of the randomized controlled trials, when you really go and look at an effectiveness trial rather than a clear efficacy trial. So that was part of the logic behind doing this too. We thought the genetic testing might actually be more valuable there. In this, so we have two main endpoints: total healthcare costs, which we're capturing from the EHR. We're still working on that, something to figure out how we're to get the best way, or we'll probably end up doing it multiple ways, and the number of adverse events that occur, both from either drug-induced adverse events or lack of efficacy adverse events in some cases. And then it was originally started with Eskenazi, but we're now rolling it out to IU Health, which is a statewide healthcare organization that's associated with the university, which has, I think it's 17 hospitals throughout the state. And I'll talk a little bit how we're actually doing that on the next slide. The goal of the recruitment is 2,000 in the genotyped arm and 4,000 in the standard of care arm. This is the list of drugs and their respective genes that we have on there. For people that have been doing it, and actually we modified it a little bit. There's a couple on there that aren't actually on there. Partly like glyceride, we decided there wasn't quite enough evidence, but some of them also aren't really being used, because even in from the time we wrote the grant until now, things like pegylated interferon and Hep C is basically not used or very rarely used anymore. So there's a few things that we actually took off. Methadone, we decided there wasn't likely a big enough effect on the QT for that one. But that's, in general, this is the list of drugs that's on there. And for each of those drugs then, we went in and had a group of people that was made up of, and I was leading it, but then it had a couple pharmacists, a few MDs, and a couple other PhDs, and a couple fellows that were meeting every week to come up with a flow chart like this for every one of the drugs on that list. So we could look at the genotype and then get that information fed back to the provider if they had one of the genetic variants that was actually had some suggested alteration to their actual medication. So we have like 20 some of these things for each of the different medication. And not only, and again, like when I was talking about the CPIC, so these are based largely on the CPIC guidelines. That's where a lot of the information comes from. But it's also got here the level of evidence or the strength of the recommendation for each of those different recommendations. And for if anybody's interested in the genotype, yeah.
Sorry, are those flow charts generalizable knowledge that you can share with everybody, or is it?
Sure. Nope. Yep.
Can you put them in the box?
Yeah, I was thinking we actually did. We can put a bunch of stuff in that. No, I thought he actually did, but he actually put in, it was like the little scripts that we use that are recommendation. I just realized that actually last night. So yeah, so that's another like 20 some things that we can put in the toolbox. Because I was going to say, it's like, and these are all in the toolbox, and then I went back just to double check, and there was actually something different. So if anybody's interested in the genotype, it's just the technical details. There's 51 SNPs, 16 genes. we're using the Quant Studio, which is Life Technology, actually Thermo Fisher now, and using the open arrays. We're doing it in addition, we have to do CYP2D6 copy number variations in a 96-well plate. And we chose this because, number one, it's, in my experience, they're very accurate. It's flexible, so we can modify, we can add and take off genes as we wanted. Interferon is basically never used anymore, so we're taking that one off and replacing it with different genes, so we can take things off and put on, unlike things like Affymetrix chip or something where you order once and you're sort of stuck with that for 5 years or so. Good throughput, simple workflow, and it's CLIA approved and CAP certified in doing that. So, and I'm going to blow this up on the next slide to give you a little better view of it. I don't expect you can read this, but this is in the 2 different hospital systems, Eskenazi and IUH. This is the actual workflow that goes through to actually identify and engage and enroll patients in the actual trial. They're similar between the 2 systems, but a little bit different. So basically what happens is, so the goal is to identify patients that get one of our scripts of one of those 25 medications for the first time. And we, because if they're already on the medication, they're just getting a refill, they're likely to see their medication is working or they're not going to have side effects, and that seems to be okay. So we wanted only scripts for patients getting it for the first time. That was informatically a little bit difficult, so we're going back and saying if they haven't had one in the last 13 months, that should get any scripts that are any renewals or anything, because there's basically not any scripts that, or very few that go more than a year. What happens in a clinic, a provider writes a script for one of the targeted medications. So this is just throughout the whole hospital. Cerner then and this is the case with the IU Health system, transfers that data to their data warehouse. They do that every night. That gets transferred to a data warehouse. And then within Cerner, we have a report that screens the data warehouse for the inclusion and exclusion criteria, which is basically they get one of the medications, they haven't had it in the last 13 months, and in a couple cases there's a CPT code or an ICD-9 code that goes with it. That report then is sent to us, to the Ingenious team. For those of you that know Ken, that's, in this case, Ken does this. We decrypt the report, look at it, and first thing we have to do is compare it to patients already in the trial. So if they're already in the trial, then they get, well actually, if they're already in the trial, they get excluded because they're already in the trial, and I'll come back to that in a second. Then they get randomized to using an online randomization tool to either the control or the intervention arm. The control arm is just, we put them in and we follow them, but they're not contacted, they're not consented, we've got primary approval, so we don't need to consent them. So they're just followed as, for the next year, stuff without any intervention at all. And then the subjects to be that are randomized to the intervention arm are actually recruited by, this is a research network of research assistants, or we just have a new person starting that actually then gets that patient, we send the report to them, they get the patient's name, MR number, and their phone number, and they actually call them. If they fail to reach them within 5 days, because we need, one of the criteria is we need to get the blood sample within 5 days, because if they've been on the medication for 3 weeks, they probably already know whether they're going to tolerate it or not. So we want to get it as soon as possible. We've decided 5 days was a reasonable time. So they have 5 days to call them. When they reach them, they then discuss the study with the subject and provide a URL we've set up so that their consenting is all done online, because this is now going statewide, so we can't have somebody in every clinic to actually recruit them. The study is a little too complicated to actually explain to a coordinator, and like I said, there's 122 different clinics that IU has their own states. We can't have 122 coordinators or educate all them. So we've done it so this is all online. So the consenting is all done online. If they, after they talk about that, if they refuse, we just enter them in as refused, so we will never approach them again. If They basically then they complete the consent. If they don't, we remind them after a couple days. But then once they consent, there's a note that comes to our research person, which they then create a request form, which is faxed into the central IUH system for lab requisitions, of which then the patient can go to any of the draw stations around the state. That's part of the IU Health blood draw, or the IU Health healthcare system. And then what they do is once they get in there, they can see because the rec will be available to any of them. And they then draw the blood, which then gets sent to our genotyping lab. And then the information is entered into REDCap, and Power Trials is another little add-on to CERN, so everybody knows they're on a trial. And then we reimburse them $50 for being as part of that. So once we have the blood sample in the lab, then we send them a check. It also, the team completes and emails research grant charge form. So this gets charged to our grant and not to, we don't bill it to insurance or anything. So this is purely a research study. So this, as you see, previously we had it when it was just an Eskenazi, that was a homemade EMR system, so we could go into that and program real-time alerts. So all this stuff was actually, most of this stuff was all being done in real time versus having this thing where we get the following morning, we get everybody's scripts from the previous day. So changing EMRs had a major change in that. There's still a lot of manual stuff here, okay for research purposes, not okay for as we get further down and try and implement this clinically, as a general implementation. So just and obviously we got to wait till we get all the reports done before we can actually figure out if there's any effect or not. But the one preliminary data we do have is not related to outcomes, but the question is, so how often is there actually an actionable report that comes back when we look at the genotyping report and the medications? The answer is about 25% of times when there is a notification sent to the provider, who then can do with it as they please. We hope they will actually implement it. And of those, about 20% of those, which is a total of about 4%, there was actually a need for a consult with one of the clinicians on our team, as far as, or pharmacists on our team, to really explain or help explain what's going on and why, what they should do based on the medication.
Todd, who did the referral to the committee? Is that something that you flagged, or that a clinician said, I need extra help with this?
That is, so it's a combination. So it can be if the clinician calls back, but it's, in fact, that's usually it's what if the clinician calls back. There's some cases where it's, if it was a real complicated thing, because a lot of these patients are on multiple medications in some cases. That's, I'm going to sort of switch for other implementation thing now, unless there's other questions, so we can have a discussion on that.
With that result, can you build a model that actually, I know your outcome, you want to get real economic data, but even with that result, can't you build models that say, if these are not acted on, what's the likelihood of adverse events and, the cost associated with that versus, can you do that?
Yeah, so that's essentially what we're trying to do with the economic analysis of the 2C19 and clopidogrel deal, using some of Josh Peterson's stuff that they've done. And so I think it could probably be done. I mean, that's been a thing that's been going on for 6 months or something now for one drug, and we've got 25 here, different ones. So, and there is, with clopidogrel, there's a lot more data because of there's a lot of trials, prospective trials with that. But there's a lot of information on the rates of adverse events and the differences between the different genotype arms. So you need, the model's only be as good as the data that you have to put into it. Some of these, I think, there's not real good data on the number of events if you genotype versus if you don't, or if you switch medications and that. But I think it could ultimately be done. It's basically, and so really the one that's done with the 2C19 and clopidogrel would be one of our 25 ones out there. Yeah.
So you said etymology was a homegrown EHR. Is IU all Cerner or is it mixed?
It's, sorry, it's 95% Cerner. And the ones that are not Cerner, we're not going to be able to enroll patients from those ones. Because our report and the original notification comes from a Cerner report. And it just means there's, one down in southern Indiana and one other one that's good.
How many people use participating testing?
I don't remember the number offhand. It's not very many. There's our actual enrollment rate is about of the ones that are randomized to the intervention arm, and this is one of the potential caveats that's we're going to have to keep in mind, is about 30%, I think, of the ones that are actually enrolled there. So we're keeping a whole separate group of what we're calling our intent to treat, which is the ones that were randomized but not actually consented for one reason or another. Those reasons are they don't speak English, is some of them. Some of them we could never reach them. Some of them they refuse. Those are the main three reasons that they go into that are randomized to the enrolled arm but not actually ultimately consented to enroll. There's not very many that, once we get a hold of them and do it. There are a few that, they just think it's too big of a hassle to come back. They don't want to come back. They're working and it's busy, whatever. We tried, initially we weren't actually providing any incentives, and we went up to, we tried $5, that didn't seem to work real well. But talking to some of the people that have recruited patients out of that hospital before, they said $50 is a pretty significant amount of money for a lot of those people. I think it's helped some, and we're not going to go any higher than that because we don't want to get too high. But the IRB was fine with using up $50 personally.
Hi, thanks. This was a really good explanation. So I'm wondering, when you talk about value, you were talking in terms of costs. And so I was wondering, I guess, your experience, is there any other aspect of value that you think would be useful to consider? And in particular, I was wondering, I noticed that you didn't include patients. Patients, like you're looking at cost or value to the, I can't remember what your slide was, providers to,
I didn't have a patient on those.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, it's an open question.
So that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So I think there's a variety of different ways you can look at it. One is, just the number of adverse events and the loss of work productivity, all those sort of things. Two is the total net cost that the hospital system, these are sort of things. But there's other things like with the affordable care organizations now, showing some sort of, if you don't show some sort of improvement, I don't pretend to understand all of the ACO incentives and all that stuff, but there are some things in it where you've got to show some improvements in some, sort of aspects of things. If this were, one of the things we're trying to pitch this as maybe, because IU Health is one of, they have some component of that for the care organization. So as things where you've got to reduce some of those events and show improvement, is one of them. Quite frankly, a marketing thing. For you could you hear people say I hear all the time, a variety of different cancer centers and different things that are saying we are now using genomics to do. So there's you could use the trying to Nashville and see Vanderbilt. Bulletin boards that would say they're doing these sort of things. So I think from a marketing standpoint, so for example, IU Health can compete with some of the other healthcare systems, within the state. So I think there's a lot of different things like that, as well as to the patients and for them, and that's sort of embedded in that. But a lot of the not missing work days, those sort of things, and they're really difficult to put a dollar value. Somebody dies, what's that? Sort of thing. And then you get into now I should prevent the death rather than, kind of assign some sort of value to a person clinically. And you talk to the insurance companies, and it's like, well, for them, it's like, is it gonna save me money over the next 12 months? Because they know there's a lot of issues that change, so they, this came out in that paper. They're really primarily interested in what's it gonna save in the next 12 months, not in the 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. So it's a very important point that we make that there's a million different ways to look at it, and how do you, is any one of those good enough to actually justify it? Depends on who you are.
Who you're talking to, yeah.
Exactly. Other questions? Okay. So this is now actually not really part of a research protocol. This is actually just pure clinical use of the same genotyping chip in what we call our precision genomics oncology clinic. Patients that have either refractory cancers or tumors of unknown origin. Somatic tumor genomics is done by the Nantomics, which does whole genome sequencing of both the germline and the tumor, or Foundation Medicine and Paradigm, which do targeted somatic mutations. We have now incorporated the germline Pharmacogenetics done by the same, by Vicki Pratt's lab, the same genotyping platform I just talked about. And here from an implementation standpoint, if I, so this is the report that comes from the genotyping report. If I take this and just give to the oncologist, and we've tried that, and it's like, so what the hell do I do with it, right? And so what I'm going to show you is over the next few slides, a variety of different things that we've incorporated into, and like 4 or 5 slides later, I'll show you how we've actually presented to the physician. So this has information on it, but it's also then, as I started thinking about how we were going to portray that to the patient, keeping this in mind, that so this is from that clinic, a histogram of the number of patients that were taking this number of different medications, right? So there's, and this is over the first, I don't know, like 150 people or something, like patients or something like that. There was 3 that weren't taking any other medications, all right? And, patients on the average is like 8.5, some up, 15, 18, 20. So not only do we have to consider if I was going to say, okay, this person's a 2D6 poor metabolizer, so you shouldn't give them codeine. Well, that also is going to depend on whether they're taking paroxetine or fluoxetine, some of these other drugs that are potent inhibitors, it's the same thing. So the law really should incorporate the drug interactions in with it. And because if you looked at those medications, so this is a graph, again, this is the number of patients on that axis, and this is the number of Cytochrome P450 enzymes that were either inhibited or induced by the concurrent medications of these patients, right? So you can see the majority of them had at least, or had one, so there was 60 out of the like 150 or so. Some of them had 2, 3, 4, and it's like, these are ones that you really worry about. If you've got 6 of your main disposal mechanisms of your drugs inhibited, those are ones that you really want to worry about. But so we couldn't just look at just their genetics, because this also has a major influence. So it's like, okay, so we got to incorporate that in there too. And to do that, this is a paper that we published a while back, where we actually combine, we take their genetic information and their concurrent medications, and we come up with an activity score that goes from 0 to 3. And 0 means they have no functional activity for that enzyme. 2 means they have the equivalent of 2 functional copies. 1 is halfway in between, either a partial inhibitor or 1 loss of function variant, and 3 being multiple copies with no inhibitors. So we were going to use that. And then it was also evident after we started talking to them that there's several of these drug interactions that some of the oncologists were not necessarily aware of. This is one, this isn't our work, it's just work that was published, but showing that torlatinib, which is what, a $60,000 a year drug or something like that. This is the normal pharmacogenetics curve you'd expect from that, but somebody who's on a proton pump inhibitor, you increase the pH and they're poorly absorbed if their pH isn't low enough. Okay, so it's one of these drug interactions. There's actually became evident that there was this is an example, but there's a variety of these things that the physicians were not necessarily aware of because they're on how many drugs, and as we were talking about earlier, there's 1 million drugs now, and so they don't necessarily know these things. So I thought, okay, so I better include something like that in there too. So the solution I came up with is this slide. So in the tumor board, after we get all this information, I create this slide, which comes after the patient history, which the presenting physician presents. And this is sort of meant to be a quick glance thing where you can look at this and see if there are any major things that need to be considered when choosing their medication. And so it has here the 5 main Cytochrome P450 enzymes that are going to metabolize or be significant for most of the cancer drugs that are metabolized significantly. This is TPMT for azathioprine and captoprene. The main ones for mostly for pediatric cancer, so not used much here. This is DPOID for 5-FU and capecitabine. So these have genetic variants, plus if there's drug interactions indicated on here too. If everything's fine and normal, no variants, they get the green smiley face. If they have a genetic variant, so in this case it's a yellow in the middle of the supposed stop sign thing that has a DNA squiggle in the middle of it, that means this person has a reduced function genotype for that particular enzyme, as does this one. This one is a up arrow, that means they're on a moderate inducer, and they've got a pill in the middle of it, so that means it's a drug interaction potential, so it's got, this would be something that induces 3A activity. And then down here is, I pull this out of Cerner. This is basically based on bilirubin, and on our stuff, but basically bilirubin. Renal function is based on creatinine. Here's the stomach pH, so if they're on a proton pump inhibitor, they get a red arrow with a pill on it, so that's a big thing. If they're on H2 blockers, which a lot of them are on, then it's a yellow arrow with a pill in the middle. And then if there's a significant number of drugs that are increasing their risk of QTc prolongation, or if they have they've had an EKG and they have a really long QT, then I'll put an indication here. And these are a couple additional variants that are basically ones that Brian Schneider and his group have identified that predict for a risk of adriamycin-induced cardiomyopathy, peripheral neuropathy, or from things like cisplatin or hypertension, basically from anti-angiogenic drugs. So this then, as you see, we go through the history, and then this gives them a quick look to see, okay, is there anything else that we need to really be worried about, which we can come back to. And then it goes from there into the discussion of the somatic tumor genomics of the patient, and then we go on to refer back to this. But I actually sit that on that tumor board and do this. So the question then, how often does this affect a lot of any of the medications? But frankly, in this cancer group, not that often. The actual pharmacogenetics genotype not that one, because these are patients who already have been through a lot of the chemotherapy, so they're not going to get things like 5-FU and capecitabine again usually, but they do sometimes. And a lot of these are already on a lot of supportive care drugs, so a lot of them are on anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants, a high dose opioids, and some of those. The idea is to sort of get it moving so we can actually roll it out later in the earlier ones where they're in the adjuvant setting, where they're going to get a lot of the supportive care medications are going to be coming later on, the opioids and things like that. So just quickly, and this is based mostly on the somatic variants, but this was a paper we published in Targets last year. The question is, do the patients who get the targeted therapies do any better than the ones who we couldn't find any specific target for? And the answer is yes. These are the curves. So the ones who have a somatic variance for either guiding their therapy or putting them on a specific targeted clinical trial are in the genomic directed ones, and all the other ones are in the non-directed ones, which means either you can have, they're just different tumors, or there's this isn't a perfect comparison. I'll show you in the next slide sort of how we did it. But you can see the ones that, the non-genomic guided ones had a worse outcome than the other ones. If you look at, a way to actually analyze this is look at because these people have been on multiple, a lot of them have been on multiple different therapy regimens before this. So typically, the more regimens you go on, the worse your outcomes get as you go on, right? So this was classified, looked at the percent of people that had a progression-free survival of greater than 1.3 times the length of their last therapy they were on. So if their last therapy, they went 3 months before they actually progressed, then they would have to go 3 months, 1.3 times 3 months, that was like 4. They would have to go 4 months to be considered a responder. So that way you're sort of in a way correcting for that particular patient's actual previous therapy. If you look at that, the genomic directed ones did actually a lot better than the non-guided ones. This isn't a perfect analysis because there's some caveats to that, but then I'll move on if we run into some more discovery things, unless that I can stop there if there's specific questions on that before I move. Nope. Okay. So the problem then, they said, okay, so this is great, we've got a bunch of these variants, but we still have this issue of, this is a case where we look at drug concentrations of an active metabolite. In this case, it was tamoxifen, some study published a while back. Even when you account for the genetic variability in the wild type variants, there's still a huge amount of actual variability there that we can't account for. And so, and I'll just quickly go through this. So basically, and this is one of our ones that's focused on microRNAs that might regulate hepatic drug metabolism. That's just some of the, if anybody's interested in some of the details of that. And so the question was, why do microRNAs in the liver change? Various little microRNAs that regulate gene expression. And so we know drug metabolism changes over the developmental period. And so the question was, do microRNA expressions change? This is a graph with 90 subjects looking at microRNA expression. And this is the PCR, the CT value, so actually it's the inversion of the expression level. So these are people that have high expression, and these are ones that have low expression. You can see these are all fetal samples. These are pediatric and adult samples. The fetal samples have a high expression of this particular microRNA, which is the blue dots, and then the MER16 is this one, which is more of a housekeeping microRNA. Which doesn't change. This is one that goes the other direction. So there's a lot of them that change. If you do a principal components analysis on the microRNA expression, you can see that fetal ones separate from the pediatric and adult, and there's a big change, and that's a problem in dosing medications for kids because the rate at which their levels go up oftentimes changes. So we think it might be part of that. Also, do any drugs that we know change drug metabolism in the liver change microRNA expression? This is from another paper we published, and the answer is yes. There's a bunch that are upregulated. There's a bunch that are downregulated. These are primary human hepatocytes treated with rifampin, something we know really changes drug metabolism. And so then, we're not going to be able to do liver biopsies on anybody to see how we're going to dose them, right? So the hypothesis was that if there may be genetic variants in microRNA binding sites that alter the way people actually respond to these genetic variants. So said, okay, let's look at some of the major metabolizing enzymes. So here, these are CYP, a bunch of the different CYPs. And then the number of SNPs in their, in what are predicted to be microRNA binding sites, and the number of microRNAs that are either lost, binding sites that are lost or gained, so created or lost. By that, you can see they have a lot of them that are predicted to have that the SNPs are predicted to create or lose microRNA binding sites. This is actually an example of an in vitro assay where you can see this microRNA, it's a luciferase assay, and compared to the controls, normally if you, just for time's sake, I'm just going to give you the main point here is that microRNAs in the wild type sequence will actually reduce the expression, which is normally what you would expect. It's not huge, but that's typical of microRNAs, versus plasmids that have the variant sequence and it doesn't have any effect. Okay, so we had in vitro functional data. This particular SNP was only expressed in African Americans. We looked at genotypes from a bunch of different populations. It was only in African Americans, so we had to find a clinical trial that had 2D6 phenotype in all African American populations. I know of one, and this is the one because they're pretty rare. And make a long story short, this is the difference between the 2D6 activity of one of those SNPs. That was one in HNF4A, which is a major transcription factor that regulates 2D6. I've got one other set of some functional ones, but I may actually skip over that if there's questions related to this. Otherwise, I can talk for a couple minutes while I'm out. If there's other questions anyone for discussion, or could I take a minute or two?
I wanted to ask you, I was just thinking about the oncology. You said your oncology clinic is using this like in real clinical care. You're on their tumor board. So what's the difference between, why is that working so well and the Ingenious study not as well? I mean, what is it that got who's paying for the genetic testing? Is that all part of the germline genomes that are used to compare the somatic genomes? Or
no, so it is, the reason that is working, it's still paid by institutional research, institutional resources to actually pay for that genotyping. So it's not reimbursed, so we're not getting the insurance to reimburse it. The reason that's working is because it's a single clinic, and it is that the person who's running that clinic strongly believes in using pharmacogenetics to guide therapies. And so every person that comes in, and it's a very intensive clinic, so they come in, get their tumors biopsied, and then there's people that spend like 2 hours or an hour with a patient when they get the genomics back, explaining the somatic tumor genomics. And so the people that are doing that are also well versed in the whole pharmacogenomics stuff. And there is a clinical pharmacist that's part of that in that discussion. And there's the clinician themselves, and then a PhD who's really the one who understands all the drug gene matching from the somatic mutation. So it's a very intensive, intensive clinic like that, and there's one clinic led by people who are championing it. And it's not the clinic itself is actually fully self-sustaining. That doesn't include our genotyping stuff as part of it.
But in reality, you're saying that because you have somebody who has command of some resources, who believes in it, but doesn't have any evidence that it actually makes a difference, that's why you can do it in oncology, whereas the rest of the work is not, it's not being supported by somebody with that kind of belief and resources.
There's the evidence. There is evidence that it should help, not in that specific population. Yeah, right. Now, if they were going to start, codeine or amitriptyline or any of those things, it's pretty reasonable to extrapolate, I think, from other studies. And so the basis for the evidence for doing it in that population is the same as the CPIC evidence.
But what's the, in the oncology clinic, is there a time that somebody will say, we're now, how do you make it sustainable, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, and that's, there is a time, and that time is from about a year ago until noon today, or 1 o'clock today. It's an ongoing thing, and so we are, and that goes back to some of the discussions about how do we define a benefit of this sort of a thing. So we are having a variety of discussions with the IU Health, so that's an IU Health clinic, to try and convince them that, that there would be value to them actually supporting that as part of that clinic, and eventually rolling it out wider and having them actually, the healthcare organization of IU Health actually support it and do it. So that's what we're trying to do to get that supported. it's, I think we're, I mean, part of that is getting the genotyping costs down, so they're, you know, if the patient ends up getting billed for it, it's not going to be, you know, some crazy amount that nobody would think is reasonable, which is what they wanted to do. But getting it and really, you know, getting the number of samples, the more samples that go through, the cheaper the genotyping costs will, you know, become. So, yeah, so it's an ongoing discussions with the organization and stuff. It's not, outside of that, it's not the pharmacogenomics part of it's not self-sustaining.
We have time maybe for one question or so, if anybody may have. Well, if not, thank you for coming.
Thank you. The one I didn't put on was so this is just a short list of the people that are involved. You can see the people from all kinds of different departments, informatics, genetics, public health, and all that. So I talked about a lot of different things. Obviously, none of them was only mine, but it really takes, and we were talking about this earlier, it takes building relationships with a bunch of people to really make this happen. All right, thank you.
Thank you. That was good. Yeah, I learned a few things I didn't know about your about what was going on at IU too.
Sort of a little bit. Some of it was redundant.
I got stuck.
Well, but not everyone. I mean, there's only